So take a few more minutes to check your motivation for participating in this course, in this session, and really try your best to have a altruistic motivation, thinking to benefit other beings as well as yourself, as many other people and beings as possible, to help them be free of their suffering and causes of suffering, and help them find genuine peace and happiness. Okay, so yesterday we managed to look at the first 5 of the mental factors, which are called omnipresent because they are there all the time. They accompany every single moment of experience that we have. So the next group of mental factors are called the object-ascertaining mental factors, and there are 5 of these. And so they start on the bottom of page 5 of the notes. There's a footnote at the bottom, which didn't completely get printed on my copy here. This book, which is called Science and Philosophy in the Indian Buddhist Classics, Volume 2, The Mind, which is quite a comprehensive coverage of all the different aspects of the mind. So these 5 are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous from their own side, but they could become virtuous or non-virtuous depending on the presence of another mental factor. And I think that these 5 might be easier for us to relate to than the 5 omnipresent, because I think we can more easily see them in our experience, identify them in our experience. And also they are part of our spiritual practice, or they're supposed to be part of our spiritual practice. These are things we need to cultivate in order to practice meditation and progress along the path. Yeah, so the notes say, and again, this is from volume 2 of Venerable's books, what's it called? Approaching the Foundations of Buddhist Practice. Okay. So that's from His Holiness and Venerable Children. And so the explanation is these are so called because they apprehend individual features of an object. The Treasury of Knowledge, that's Vasubandhu's text, Abhidharmakosha, says that these 5 accompany all mental states. So that means, according to that text, according to Vasubandhu, there are actually 10 omnipresent mental factors, the previous 5 and these 5. However, not everybody agrees with that, including his brother Asanga, because this other text called Compendium of Knowledge, that's written by Asanga, the brother of Vasubandhu. According to that text, these 5 don't accompany all mental states, but only virtuous mental states. But there seem to be different opinions about that as well, because I've read in other books that some of these 5 can accompany non-virtuous states and also neutral states. So there's different opinions, different points of view about these 5, whether they're only virtuous, or they could also be non-virtuous or neutral. Just to know that different masters have different points of view. Yeah, so it says these 5 are not themselves virtuous, but they can become virtuous if they are associated with a virtuous mental state. In this case, the mindfulness. So mindfulness is one of these 5. So if mindfulness is accompanying a mental consciousness that apprehends and has aversion towards a repulsive object, so that means if we're in a state of mind where we're looking at an object that we dislike, that we find disgusting, and we feel aversion towards it, so there could be mindfulness in that mental state, but according to His Holiness and seemingly Asanga, that would not be the mindfulness that's included in these 5. It would be some other mental factor similar to it. because they're taking the point of view that mindfulness, the actual mindfulness talked about here, is only the one that accompanies virtuous mental states. And that's what we're trying to cultivate when we're following the path. We're trying to cultivate mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, and so on that are helpful for our progress along the path. So they would be virtuous ones. Okay, so let's look at these. The first one is called aspiration. So this is explained as it takes a strong interest in an intended or desired object and is the basis for joyous effort. And there are three types: wanting to meet the object, wanting to not separate from the object, and wanting to obtain the object. So one example of aspiration would be wishing to attain qualities that we do not yet have, or I think it could also include wishing to increase good qualities that we do already have. So one place where this, one role this plays in our spiritual practice is developing bodhicitta. So you've probably heard this before, that bodhicitta, which is the aspiration to become a Buddha to help all living beings, this starts with an aspiration to benefit others. So it's actually said there are two aspirations, this mental factor, two aspirations involved in the cultivation of bodhicitta. One is the aspiration to help others. So we probably all do feel that sometimes, to a certain extent, when we hear about or we observe somebody who's suffering, and we feel the aspiration to help them to be free of their suffering. We would like to relieve them of their suffering. Okay, so we probably already have that state of mind at certain times. So this is the mental factor of aspiration. And then we need to cultivate that more and more. So we do meditation on loving kindness and especially compassion. We contemplate all the different sufferings that are experienced by different sentient beings and cultivate this state of mind. How wonderful if they could be free of their suffering, and go even further and feel, may I free them from their suffering. So I think that is how we cultivate this aspiration to free sentient beings from suffering. So that then becomes that's the cause for developing bodhicitta. So eventually, when that aspiration becomes stronger and stronger, and then we develop this other aspiration, the aspiration to become enlightened, because we find out about enlightenment, Buddhahood, and if we attain that state of mind, the state of mind of a Buddha, then we can fulfill our aspiration to benefit others. That's the best thing we can do to help all living beings. So then bodhicitta arises in our mind, which is, well, initially it's an aspiration, but then later it becomes a commitment. We actually make this commitment. Engaging bodhicitta is when we actually decide, I am going to do it. I'm going to become enlightened to help all living beings, and we start engaging in the activities, the deeds to become enlightened. So anyway, that comes about through aspiration, this mental factor, cultivating those two kinds of aspirations more and more. Another place where we find aspiration is in the cultivation of calm abiding. So when you study the teachings on how to cultivate calm abiding, and it mentions different kinds of obstacles or hindrances to calm abiding. The first one on the list is laziness. And laziness here is just you don't feel like meditating. You have a lack of enthusiasm, a lack of energy to practice meditation. We've probably all experienced that. So that's an obstacle to calm abiding, because if we want to attain calm abiding, we have to have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy to meditate, and just keep doing it until we get there, until we reach calm abiding. So it said that in order to overcome that laziness, that reluctance to meditate, there's a step-by-step process. First, we have to learn about the good qualities of calm abiding, how fantastic it will be if we achieve calm abiding. And when we hear about those qualities and think about those qualities, then we generate faith, a sense of faith that it's like a conviction that calm abiding is a good state of mind, good for us, good for others, something we want to achieve. That in turn gives rise to aspiration. I want to do it. I want to have that state of mind. Okay, so, and then aspiration leads to joyous effort, which is what it says here, that aspiration is the basis for joyous effort. So we have this joyous effort, energy to keep practicing until we reach calm abiding. And then eventually we will achieve calm abiding. And with calm abiding, there's this virtuous mental quality called pliancy. We'll look at that later. Flexibility, ease of body and mind. And that's said to be the real antidote to laziness. So once we have that pliancy, which arises with calm abiding, there's no more laziness. There's no more reluctance to meditate. You're just happy to meditate. You could sit there all day long, although you probably have other things to do like wash dishes, but anyway, you would be happy to sit there all day long meditating. So anyway, so that's just illustrations of how aspiration plays a role in our spiritual practice. Yeah, so again, it's seeing some object that we desire, that we wish to achieve, have this aspiration to achieve it, and then that is the basis for joyous effort, which Venerable Sangye has been talking about a lot in BBCs. Okay, so number 2, second of these object-ascertaining mental factors is called, here it's called appreciation. Other translations for this are belief. In some books it's translated as belief. This book, it's translated as resolution, so you can take your pick. But what it is, how it's described is, it stabilizes the apprehension of a previously ascertained object and holds it such that it cannot be distracted by another view. So that may not make a whole lot of sense, but what's involved with this mental factor is when we understand something, for example, the precious human rebirth, when we learn about that topic in the Lam Rim, the precious human rebirth, and we meditate on it, we contemplate it, we get more understanding of it, and hopefully we get to the point where we accept it. We accept that it's true, that this human life that I have with all the opportunities that I have is extremely precious, and we want to make good use of it. So we accept that particular explanation, that particular point of the Lam Rim. And so that would be an example of this mental factor. We think it's like that, it's true. And it's said that when you have this mental factor, your holding of that object, your belief in that. Yeah, in a way, I think belief is probably a good translation for this. You believe that so strongly that even if somebody were to come along and tell you, oh, it's not true, whatever it is you believe in isn't true, but you won't be swayed by that. So at the end of this, it says it cannot be distracted by another view. Your mind will not be pulled away from your belief by somebody else's view who's telling you otherwise. So it apprehends an object that we already know, we've already learned about and thought about, so it's something we understand, and then it holds on to that, thinking it is true, it is like that. That's how it's explained. So that's also important in our spiritual practice, because otherwise we may have doubt. uncertainty. Is it true or not true? And that can become kind of an obstacle to moving forward in our practice. Like, the value of ethics, for example. That's a really important aspect of our practice, living ethically. And so we hear about that, but in the beginning we might have doubt about it. Is that really true? Is it really that important to live ethically, to keep vows and so forth? And so that doubt could cause us to be, flaky in our practice and not have strong enthusiasm for our practice. So when we do get to the point where we do accept something, even though we may still have a little bit of doubt, we may be not 100% convinced, but convinced enough to make commitments, to actually decide to take vows, for example, try to live by those vows, or to do a daily practice. We get to the point where we're convinced enough that we're willing to move forward on this. And we won't be pulled away by people telling us otherwise. Okay, number 3, mindfulness. Very important one. Okay, so how it's explained? It's a mental factor that repeatedly brings to mind a phenomenon of previous acquaintance. So that means the object of mindfulness is something that we already know, something we are familiar with. It doesn't forget it. Okay, another aspect of mindfulness is not forgetting it, at least in that moment. You might forget it later, but in the moment that mindfulness is there in the mind, then it causes the object to not be forgotten. The next point says it does not allow the mind to be distracted from the object and is the basis for concentration. So mindfulness is very important, for example, in the development of concentration or the development of calm abiding. So it plays a crucial role in that, because when we want to develop calm abiding, we have an object, and it could be the breath, or it could be an image of the Buddha. So there's different objects you could choose. But once you have decided what object you're going to use for your practice, then you have to keep your mind focused on that object and not forget it. Not forget your object. Not get distracted away from your object to something else. So mindfulness is whenever you do remember your object, whenever your mind is still holding that object, that shows mindfulness is present. So don't expect that you're going to see mindfulness, with flashing lights saying, I'm mindfulness, I'm mindfulness, I'm mindfulness. I think that would be difficult. But you can know if mindfulness is present or not by whether or not your mind has remembered your object, is remembering your object. And when the object is there, being remembered by your mind, then that shows this mental factor of mindfulness is present. And then when your mind forgets the object, wanders away and is thinking about what's for lunch or thinking about something you did yesterday, so whenever the object has been forgotten, that means mindfulness is not present. So the presence or absence of mindfulness in the mind can be known by whether or not your mind is on the object. So that's the role it plays in the development of calm abiding, concentration. But they also use mindfulness in other contexts, like, for example, when we take vows. All of us here have a certain number of vows, and the very first vow or precept we take is to not kill. And that's also a vow taken by lay people who take refuge. So if you've taken that vow to not kill, then you have to keep in mind that you took that vow and not forget it. It's possible, yeah, especially in the early stages when, you just took it not too long ago, and Maybe you have the habit of killing mosquitoes or killing flies or whatever, and so you might forget that you took that precept and just habitually slap a mosquito that's landed on your arm. So that can happen. So if that happens, that shows there was a lack of mindfulness. You were not mindful of the precept that you took. And so it's very important when we do take precepts that we keep in mind, that we remain mindful that we have taken precepts so that we don't break them. I mean, it's hard in the beginning, but with time, with practice, with training, then it becomes like second nature. And you don't even have the impulse anymore to do those actions that you promised not to do. So again, mindfulness is very, very important in our practice. So if we do take on vows, precepts, commitments, that we don't forget that we made those promises so that we can keep them. Yeah, and mindfulness is often paired with another mental factor that's sometimes translated as introspective alertness. I think that's what the Venerable uses, introspective alertness. Other translators use vigilance. This book calls it meta-awareness. That sounds really cool. Yeah, and in the, I think in the Pali tradition, it's translated as clear comprehension. There's all different translations for that mental factor. And the interesting thing is that particular mental factor is not included in the 51 that we study. I don't understand why. They say it's a kind of wisdom, but still, it's such an important mental factor. It seems like it should be there on the list. Anyway, so there's often talk about mindfulness and introspective alertness together. So mindfulness in that context is, paying attention to what's happening in the moment. And then introspective alertness is said to be like a spy that checks to see if there are any like non-virtuous or afflictive mental states happening. Like so when we're meditating, but also during the day when we're going about our activities, we're advised to have mindfulness, paying attention to what is happening, what you're doing with your body, with your speech, with your mind. What am I doing? And then introspective alertness has the ability to notice if something is not right, like if there's anger, if there's attachment, or if you're about to break a precept or do something unwholesome, non-virtuous. So those two are very important that we need to cultivate together. And in the development of calm abiding, the role of mindfulness is to remember your object, keep your mind on your object. And then introspection is kind of checking out what's going on in my mind. Is there distraction? Is there the other one, laxity? These various faults that we have to look out for. In this book, it has the quotation from Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Engaging in the Bodhisattva's Deeds, which you're very familiar with by now. I think this is from chapter 5. It says, "To those who wish to guard the mind, I join my palms together and pray. Make every effort to guard mindfulness and meta-awareness," or introspective awareness. Yeah, so he talks a lot. I think that's the main point of chapter 5, which you just finished studying. Have those two mental factors.
Yesterday we were talking about the mind that watches the mind. What is that? So would this be the mental factor that does that?
I think so. Yeah. I think both mindfulness and introspection, because here in the book also it says something about mindfulness. Yeah, it says when mindfulness is categorized according to the compendium of ascertainments, which I think is another text by Asanga, there are 3 divisions: being mindful of the mind's thoughts, the body's deeds, and the voice's utterances. So, in other words, mindfulness of our thoughts and our actions and our words. So, yeah, so mindfulness and introspection both seem to play a role in observing our mind, our thoughts, and what's going on. Okay, the next one, number 4, is concentration, which is also sometimes translated as single-pointedness. Sometimes it's translated as meditative stabilization. It's samten in Tibetan. Oh no, sorry, that's not. Samten is something else. This is tingedzin. Tingedzin is concentration. Samten is meditative stabilization. So again, different words for something very similar. So concentration dwells one pointedly for a sustained period of time on a single object. It is the basis for developing serenity, calm abiding, and increasing wisdom. Okay, so I think that's not difficult to understand. It's difficult to achieve, difficult to have, but we all do have it, even for one moment or 1 minute or 2 minutes. We can keep our mind focused on an object for short periods of time. And then in the development of calm abiding or serenity, we train our minds to stay focused on a chosen object for longer and longer periods of time. And, eventually it can be 5 minutes and 10 minutes and so on. And eventually unlimited. So with the attainment of calm abiding, you can keep your mind focused on your chosen object as long as you want. And there's no distractions and no sleepiness and laxity. And it's very blissful. Yeah. And so, so this is an important mental factor in the development of calm abiding and also wisdom. Because to develop wisdom, we need to be able to keep our mind focused. If our mind is crazy, monkey mind, jumping here and there, constantly from one object to another, never able to stay focused on one object for very long, then that becomes very difficult to develop wisdom. And not just talking about the wisdom in the path, but anytime you're trying to study and learn something, if you can't keep your mind concentrated, then you won't be able to do very well. We know that from our studies in school. Okay, so number 5 is wisdom. Sherab in Tibetan, and sometimes translated as understanding or intelligence. So this functions to discriminate precisely with analysis the qualities, faults, or characteristics of an object held by mindfulness. So it involves analysis, using analysis to look at an object and analyze it and understand qualities, faults, characteristics. And again, and it shows here there needs to be mindfulness to be able to hold the object, not forget the object. Because if you're able to stay focused on an object only for 1 second, you won't be able to do much analysis of it. You won't be able to get much understanding of it. So we need to be able to hold our mind on an object for longer periods of time so that we can gain understanding of it. It cuts through indecision and doubt with certainty and maintains the root of all constructive qualities in this and future lives. So it's very, very important to be able to develop the positive qualities that we want to develop along the path and eventually reach liberation or enlightenment. So there's different types of intelligence. The first one is called inborn intelligence. This is natural acuity of mind that comes as a result of karma from previous lives. So what I think of are these children who are able to go to university at the age of 10 or something like that. You probably heard about them. We were seeing a little video. This little boy was only 10 years old, and he was at university already with students twice his age, and twice his size. So I wonder, does science have an explanation for that? Are they able to explain why it is that some kids are just so bright? Chance, good luck. And often, it's not, their parents aren't necessarily extremely intelligent. They could be just average. So how does that kid manage? So according to Buddhism, it's past lives. So that child developed their intelligence, their wisdom in a previous life. And so right from the beginning of this life, they have that intelligence. So that tells us also, if we want we want to be intelligent in our next life, we want to have that quality of mind, we need to cultivate it in this life, and we can. So the second type of intelligence or wisdom is acquired. Letter B, acquired understanding or wisdom is cultivated in this life. A person may have it with respect to various topics of the stages of the path. So this is what we're advised to focus on, not intelligence with science or languages, although they can be useful. But mainly what we want to develop our wisdom is with regard to the stages of the path, like the Lam Rim, especially emptiness. That's the most important wisdom we need to cultivate, wisdom of emptiness. So there's 3 levels of this type of wisdom, which we've heard before: the wisdom of learning, reflection, and meditation. So the first one, the understanding or wisdom arising when hearing, learning, or studying. In the past, like at Buddhist time, they didn't actually have books. Teachings were passed on orally, so students would go to a teacher and the teacher would explain the teachings, and then they would pay very good attention and learn in that way. But then later the teachings were written down, so now we can read them in books, and we also have the internet where we can gain a lot of knowledge. So anyways, so listening to teachings, studying on our own, like our notes, the notes that we've taken, reading books, and so on. So this is how we can develop this first kind of wisdom. So this brings initial knowledge of the topic and lays the foundation for the other 2 types of understanding. So the second one is the understanding or wisdom arising from critical reflection or contemplation. So this is generated by thinking about a topic on our own or debating and discussing it with others. So it's good to do both. It's good to think about it ourselves, also good to discuss with others. I've heard the Tibetan lamas say that they spend a lot of their time debating, and that's one of the chief sources of understanding, because when you have to debate a topic and answer questions about it, especially if they're done in a very forceful way, then you find out how much you really know and understand, and you can recognize mistakes in your thinking and correct those and so on. So through these processes, we gain a correct conceptual or inferential understanding of the topic. So our conceptual understanding grows more and more, and eventually we can have an inferential understanding, a correct inference, which is very strong, unshakable. And then the third type of wisdom is called the wisdom arising from meditation. And so this is derived from a deeper personal experience, when understanding of the topic arises automatically in our mind because we're very familiar with it. So it's said that we have to go through these 3 steps. We have to start with listening, learning, just to know the information. Then we also need to think about it on our own and discuss it with others to deepen our understanding so we have a correct understanding. And then the third step is meditating on what we have understood, what we have, come to an understanding of, and continue meditating on it more and more. And ideally, and the actual wisdom arising from meditation is special insight. So that means we have to cultivate calm abiding, very, very strong concentration, and then combine our intellectual understanding, our conceptual understanding of a topic such as emptiness or impermanence, combine that with calm abiding, and then eventually attain what's called special insight. That's the union of calm abiding and special insight, the union of concentration and wisdom. So that's the real wisdom arising from meditation. So it's actually quite a high level, but we can still start by meditating on whatever understanding we have gained from our study and our reflection, and gradually work towards this third type of wisdom. And that's when our mind really changes, when you have that kind of wisdom. It's really firm in your mind and brings about very positive changes. And this book also mentions another three types of wisdom: virtuous, non-virtuous, and neutral. But it doesn't explain anymore or give examples of that. But that does show that there are different opinions on whether wisdom is all, or any of these 5 object-ascertaining mental factors, are they necessarily virtuous or not. It seems there are at least some who think that there can be non-virtuous. And I think Geshe Rabten as well, in his book on mind and mental factors, mentioned that. So, I mean, it does take quite a bit of intelligence to make war, for example. If you want to do a good job, if you want to succeed in your war, you have to plan and think ahead and try to understand your enemy and what they're going to do and so on. So strategy, military strategy, that takes quite a bit of intelligence. So that might be an example of a non-virtuous use of wisdom or intelligence. Or robbing a bank. You hear about these amazing robberies that take place. So again, quite a bit of intelligence went into that, but for the wrong reason, or non-virtuous motivation. So I'll just read a quotation from this book about the value of wisdom. This is actually a quotation from a sutra called the Range of the Bodhisattva Sutra. So it says, "This superior wisdom, which is like a light, continuously clears away being's darkness. Like a lamp, it arises to illuminate. It acts as a light to the host of afflictions, for it clears away the root of craving and confusion." Yeah, so wisdom is often compared to light, because it illuminates the darkness of confusion and ignorance that doesn't see things correctly. And in that way, it can remove all the afflictions in our own mind, and then we'll be in a better position to help other sentient beings who are suffering so much as a result of afflictions in their mind. I'd like to move on and start talking about the 11 virtuous mental factors, because I think these are also very, very valuable to learn about. And in a way, I like the fact that they're putting in the teachings on the mental factors, they put the virtuous mental factors first before the afflictive ones. It's kind of uplifting, because we usually hear so much about the afflictions, the ignorance and greed and hatred and all the other afflictions. And I mean, it is important to learn about those, because they do exist in our mind and they are the cause of all our problems, all our suffering. So we do need to recognize them. But, it can sometimes become a bit depressing when you hear so much about afflictions and you see them in yourself. So it's really nice to know that there are virtuous mental factors, and we do have these, at least some of them. And there are methods for cultivating them even more. So first, I think it's really useful to look at what is virtue. For a long time, I would hear these terms virtue and non-virtue, but I never heard an explanation of what's the criteria for something being virtuous and non-virtuous. So I was really happy to come across this explanation at long last. Okay, so it says, in general, virtue is that which brings an agreeable result. In other words, happiness. So virtue is something that brings happiness. And later we'll look at what non-virtue is, but non-virtue is what brings a disagreeable result or suffering. Okay, so virtue is the cause of happiness and non-virtue is the cause of suffering. So what do we want? Do we want happiness or do we want suffering? So it's in our hands. So if we do want happiness and we don't want suffering, then we have to make effort to have more virtue and less non-virtue in our lives. And the Sangha's compendium of knowledge speaks of 5 types of virtue. So the first one is natural virtue. So this is the real virtue. What is really virtue? Natural virtues are the 11 virtuous mental factors. So these virtuous mental factors we're going to go through, starting with faith, that's the first one. These are natural virtues, and they're called out because their nature is virtuous, and that means these are the things that bring happiness. These are the things that bring the good results that we want. The second kind of virtue is called related virtues. So this includes main minds and mental factors that become virtuous because they are accompanied by virtuous mental factors. So that's like yesterday I said, if a virtuous mental factor like faith is in the mind, then that causes the whole mind, that whole moment of mind, to become virtuous. So the main mind and all the other mental factors become virtuous. And I made that little drawing to illustrate that. So the main mind and the other mental factors that are in the same package, in the same group with a virtuous mental factor, they all become virtuous. Not because they are naturally virtuous, but they are colored virtuous by the presence of the virtuous mental factor. Because they could also become non-virtuous if there was a non-virtuous mental factor there. So that's the meaning of related virtues. And third is subsequently related virtues. These are seeds and latencies of virtue established by virtuous minds and mental factors and by virtuous actions. For example, the karmic seed created by the mind of generosity. Okay, so when we have generosity is actually said to be mainly a mind or a state of mind, an attitude that wants to give, and that can motivate actual actions of giving when we, give a donation to charity or to a homeless person. But it's mainly the mind, the state of mind that feels, I want to give. So just having that state of mind, I want to give, wanting to give, that it's virtuous. That's a virtuous state of mind. And it leaves seeds or latencies, imprints on the mind. And those seeds or latencies, they are virtuous. Not because they are virtuous by their nature, but because they are like the residue, what's left by a virtuous state of mind or a virtuous action. So it says seeds and latencies are not actual virtues. The reason for that it comes later, but a virtue has to be a mind or a mental factor. So only mental phenomena are actual virtues, and seeds and latencies are not mental. They are abstract composite. Yeah, I always forget that term because in other contexts it's called non-associated compositional factors. It's that third type. Don't worry. They say impermanent phenomena, things that are impermanent, can be divided into three groups. One is form, physical matter, like this table and our bodies and so on. So anything that's physical, that's one type of impermanent phenomena. The second type of impermanent phenomena are minds and mental factors, which are not physical phenomena, but they are still impermanent. They're changing all the time. And then there's this third category of impermanent phenomena, which is impermanent things that are not form and also not mind. So one example is time, including all the different divisions of time, like year, month, day, hour, minute. So those kind of things are impermanent phenomena, but they're not physical. They're not made of atoms and so on. And they're also not mental. They're not mind, but they're still impermanent. So they're in that third category, which, yeah, Venerable's term is easier to say. Abstract composites. So anyway, seeds and latencies that are left in our mind after we do an action, like we call them karmic seeds, but there are also seeds left by states of mind. Yeah, so when we have an afflictive state of mind like anger, or we have a virtuous state of mind like faith or generosity, that will also leave seeds, imprints in our mind. So these seeds or imprints are that third type of phenomena, abstract composite. So they're not mind, they're not form. And so they're not actual virtues, but they're kind of virtues. This third type, subsequently related virtues. And they will lead to good results. They will lead to happiness. Fourth is virtues due to motivation. So these are physical and verbal actions motivated by the naturally virtuous mental factors. For example, prostrating to a Buddha image with an attitude of faith is a physical virtue. Okay, so when we do actions with our body, like prostrating, or with our speech, reciting mantras and sutras and so on, with a virtuous motivation, then those actions are this fourth type of virtue. And why they become virtuous is because of the motivation. So the virtuous mental factor in our mind, motivating those actions, makes them virtuous. So we talk about virtuous karma, like the 10 virtuous actions, which are opposite to the 10 non-virtuous actions. So the reason those actions become virtuous is because of the motivation. So the next paragraph is a little complicated. If you don't understand it, it's understandable. There's different points of view by different schools. Vaibhashikas and Prasangikas, the two of the Buddhist philosophical schools, say that virtue includes both minds and forms, meaning physical phenomena. Thus, virtues due to motivation, physical and verbal actions motivated by virtuous mental state, are virtues. So this is a point of debate among the different Buddhist schools. The other Buddhist schools would say that when it comes to a virtuous action, like prostrating, the actual action is the mental factor of intention. The mental factor of intention that is motivating that action or accompanying that action. That's the actual karma, virtuous karma. Whereas Vaibhashika and Prasangika schools say that verbal actions and physical actions like prostrating, reciting mantras, and so on, that although these are actually form, physical form, they can still be virtue. So, and then when it comes to our precepts, pratimoksha precepts, like the precepts that we take as monastics and also the lay precepts, these are form, these are considered form, When we take precepts, there's some kind of subtle form, not like a obvious form, but a subtle kind of form that becomes part of our mind, part of our continuum. So according to those two schools, Vibhashika and Prasangika, our precepts are form, subtle form. So our precepts are virtuous forms. But the other schools, Sautrantika, Chittamatra, and Svatantrika, say that only minds can be virtues. Virtues are exclusively minds. They cannot be forms, like in the case of our precepts. So this is complicated, but it's just something to keep in mind, and we'll learn more about it later. Okay, then number 5, ultimate virtue. This is the 5th type of virtue. Ultimate virtue is emptiness, because realizing it eradicates all obscurations and enables actual virtue to flourish. However, emptiness is not an actual virtue because it is permanent and itself does not bring results. So it's just called a virtue because of the results that come when you realize emptiness. It brings many good results, but it isn't an actual virtue because it's permanent, and a permanent phenomena cannot bring any results. So yeah, it's a tricky point. In a way, it does bring results, but not really bringing results in the same way that impermanent phenomena do. Permanent phenomena transform and bring results, whereas a permanent phenomena like emptiness itself cannot transform and produce results. But when we develop the wisdom understanding emptiness, the mind that understands emptiness, that leads to results like eliminating all our afflictions and attaining the stages of the path, eventually enlightenment. So it's actually realizing emptiness that brings the results rather than emptiness itself. But still, because it's such an important topic, it's so precious, so valuable, then it's called, given this term, ultimate virtue. So anyway, there are these 5 different kinds of virtues, but it's mainly the first one. That's the main type of virtue, the natural virtues, which are these 11 virtuous mental factors. And they are responsible for all the other kinds of virtues, like virtuous actions and wisdom, realizing emptiness, and so on. I found it very helpful to come across that explanation of what exactly is virtue, although it may not be easy to understand, but anyway. Okay, so let's start looking at these, and we'll look at a few, and then I'll stop at maybe 10 minutes and give some time for questions. Okay, so the 11 virtuous mental factors cause the others, like the omnispresent mental factors, the object-ascertaining mental factors, and the variable mental factors to take on a virtuous aspect and bring peace to oneself and others. So the previous 2 groups of mental factors that we looked at, the omnipresent and the object-ascertaining, they themselves are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. They're like neutral, but they can become virtuous if they are together with a virtuous mental factor. And it also says each of the 11 is an antidote to particular afflictions. So by cultivating these virtuous mental factors, then we can overcome, be free from their opposite afflictive states of mind. So the first one is faith. That's the usual translation, but it could also be translated as confidence or trust. Some people might be uncomfortable with the term faith. That might, if you've been raised in another religion that talked a lot about faith in a certain way, that might make you uncomfortable with that term. Like, for example, we have this expression blind faith. which we see a lot of in the world, blind faith, where people just follow some religion or follow some belief without really thinking about it because their parents taught them that, or their friends pushed them into it, or whatever. They just have this. It's not real faith. According to Buddhism, that kind of faith probably isn't real faith or genuine faith. And it can lead to a lot of suffering as well. Like if you have the belief that killing infidels and women who don't have the proper head covering is a virtuous thing and will win you a place in heaven. So that kind of idea, is probably not genuine faith according to Buddhism, and obviously leads to a great deal of suffering, both for others and for oneself. So that's an extreme form of blind faith, but other types of blind faith might just keep one in a state of confusion and never really understanding the true nature of things. Okay, so according to Buddhism, faith is confidence in such things as the law of karma and its effects and the three jewels. So in the context of Buddhism, we talk about faith with regard to Buddhist ideas or Buddhist objects like the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and teachings such as karma, possibility of attaining enlightenment and nirvana, and so on. So when we have confidence in those objects or ideas, then that would be faith. It produces a joyous state of mind, free from the turmoil of the rude and auxiliary afflictions, and is the basis for generating the aspiration to develop new constructive qualities and enhancing virtuous aspirations already generated. So in other words, it helps us be free of afflictive states of mind like anger, attachment, arrogance, and so on, and is a basis for generating good qualities, because we will want to have good qualities in ourselves and we'll put energy into them, and then we will develop them and achieve them. So there's three types of faith. These are also translated in different ways. The first one is here, it's called inspired faith. Well, yeah, I think the first one is more inspired. The second one is aspiring faith. So there's a little bit of difference there. So inspired faith knows the qualities of the object and rejoices in them. So, for example, when we hear about the Buddha, or we read about the Buddha, or we meet the Dalai Lama or attend teachings by the Dalai Lama or read the books by the Dalai Lama, and we feel inspired, we think, oh, these beings have really excellent qualities. They have compassion and wisdom and equanimity, and they're dedicated to helping others. So we see good qualities there that we admire and feel inspired. We feel inspired by that person, that being, and feel happy, feel how wonderful. So we've all had that experience, at least sometimes. We want to have it more. It's good to have it more and more and more. So we feel inspired. And the second type of faith is called aspiring faith. So it's similar to the first one. It recognizes good qualities in the object, but then it aspires to attain them. So that's when we think, like, seeing the Dalai Lama, seeing how compassionate he is, and we feel, I want to be like that. That's how I want to be. Okay, so there's aspiration to attain those good qualities oneself. And third is, here it's called convictional faith, also called believing faith. And so this knows the qualities of the object and has confidence in it. So the way I've heard this explained before is this kind of faith, this is the best kind of faith. This is the one that comes about through having investigated, as the Buddha says, we shouldn't just blindly believe his teachings, but investigate them for ourselves. So if we do go through a process of investigating the Buddha and his qualities and his teachings, and we reach a point of certainty, we feel convinced, such that even if someone were to come along and try to tell us otherwise, and like disparaging the Buddha, his teachings, and saying all these negative things about them, and trying to pull us over to their point of view, we will not be shaken. Our faith will not be shaken because we're convinced. We've gone through an investigation and reached certainty about that, and it can't be shaken by what anyone else says. So that's the third kind of faith, and ideally that's the kind of faith we want to have. Otherwise, the first two kinds of faith could be shaken. If we just hear about the Buddha or we see the Dalai Lama and we think, wow, they're really nice, I really like them. But then somebody might, tell us otherwise, even tell us stories, scandalous stories that they saw on the internet about the Dalai Lama. And we could be shaken by that, yeah, because we haven't really investigated carefully ourselves. So we want to develop very strong, unshakable faith based on having investigated. So there's not much in the teachings about how to actually have faith if we don't have it, or increase faith if it's not as strong as we'd like it to be. But I think that making effort to learn about and think about and meditate on the good qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and these various teachings given by the Buddha. So the more we learn and think about and meditate on, and especially if we can actually see for ourselves the benefit, we start to experience benefits in our life from having learned these teachings and put them into practice. And we can see, yeah, this really works. This is true. So that's how our faith can grow. So it's good to understand how important faith is and how virtuous it's a virtuous state of mind. So just having faith in our mind makes our whole mind virtuous. And that's the cause of happiness. And we can also feel some instant happiness. We don't have to wait till sometime in the future. There's an immediate sense of joy when there's faith in the mind. It's good to try to, I'm saying this to myself because it's not something that always arises naturally, but it's something we can cultivate, we can bring into our mind and have in our mind. Okay, I'll just do two more quickly and then we'll stop for some questions. So the second one is called integrity. Many books call this sense of shame, which I much prefer integrity. That's a really good term. Shame can often have a not so good connotation. So this is a mental factor where we avoid negativity for reasons of personal conscience. It enables us to restrain from harmful physical, verbal, and mental actions and is the basis for ethical conduct. So this is when we have a sense, like we might feel an impulse to do something that's not good, something non-virtuous, but then this little thought comes up, like our conscience, a little voice inside that says, that for someone like me, so you're just taking yourself into consideration. For somebody like me, being a Buddhist, especially if we're a monastic, we're wearing these robes, that wouldn't be right. It just wouldn't be right for a person like me to do such a thing. And even if you're not a monastic, I think everyone has this sense inside of That's not a good thing to do. That's not the right thing to do. I shouldn't do such a thing. I like to think that it's natural, that everybody has it, regardless of how we've been educated. But I'm not sure if that's true, because you can see a lot of cases where people just full on doing non-virtuous things. So either they're just ignoring and suppressing their conscience, or I don't know. I don't fully understand that. But anyway, I like to think everybody does have this to a certain extent. Sometimes we ignore it. We go ahead and do that naughty thing anyway. But still, I think there is this sense inside that that is not a good thing to do. So the second one is similar, but it's stopping yourself from doing something non-virtuous out of consideration for others. So it says this mental factor avoids negativities for the sake of others. So one example in this book would be thinking, if I do this, the holy ones will be deeply concerned and others will disparage me, so it's not appropriate. So you're thinking about others, mainly your teachers, probably also your parents, those you respect, people you have respect for, and thinking about what would they think? What would they say if I were to do this? They would not be happy. So that kind of thought, stopping us from doing something non-virtuous or negative. So this enables us to restrain from harmful physical, verbal, and mental actions. It acts for as the basis for maintaining pure ethical conduct, prevents others from losing faith in us, and causes joy to arise in the minds of others. So these two mental factors, integrity and consideration for others, are very, very important to stop us from engaging in actions, especially of body and speech, but even of mind, that would be unwholesome, non-virtuous, the cause of suffering for ourselves, and in some cases, the cause of suffering for others. So I think we all do have these mental factors, at least sometimes, and the point is to have them more often, cultivate them, make them active. Okay, so there's a bit of time left, and a few questions were sent by email or chat. I may not have time to answer all questions, but I'll try to choose the main ones. So one question, what is the relationship between the mental factor feeling and the seventh link feeling? My understanding is that they are the same. Before this link is activated, would a fetus have feeling, since the subtlest mind that takes rebirth has its own set of omnipresent mental factors? I'm sorry, but that question, I mean, if there's omnipresent mental factors, that means feeling is present. But yeah, my understanding is that from the moment of conception, as soon as a consciousness has entered, like a fertilized egg, and that starts to develop into a new being. From that very first moment, two of the six consciousnesses are there. The mental consciousness is there, and also body consciousness. That's what's said in the teachings. So as long as consciousness is there, it seems to me that feeling would be there. There would be feeling. It would be very subtle feeling, but feeling is an omnipresent mental factor. Okay, another question was, do non-virtuous minds or main mind accompanied by non-virtuous mental factors have Buddha nature? So there's two kinds of Buddha nature. One kind of Buddha nature it's called a naturally abiding Buddha nature, and that refers to the emptiness of a mind that still has defilements in it, like my mind. So as long as our unenlightened minds still have defilements, things that need to be purified, like our afflictions, then we have Buddha nature. And the Buddha nature is actually the emptiness of our mind, the emptiness of inherent existence of our mind. So I think definitely that kind of Buddha nature is there, even when there's defilements, like non-virtuous states of mind. And in fact, they say it's because of the emptiness, because of the empty nature of our mind, that it's possible for the defilements to be cleared away. So our mind didn't have emptiness as its nature, it wasn't empty of inherent existence or independent existence, then it wouldn't be possible to eliminate the mental afflictions and attain enlightenment, because our mind would be kind of fixed and frozen just as it is, unchangeable. The other type of Buddha nature, sometimes it's called a developmental Buddha nature, is mainly the virtuous qualities of the mind, like faith and compassion and love, because those eventually become enlightened virtuous qualities, enlightened compassion, enlightened wisdom, and so on. So that's a little complicated. So what I recommend is, if you want to know more about that, in the book Samsara Nirvana Buddha Nature, page 296 to 299, you'll find an explanation of which aspects of the mind are included in the transforming Buddha nature. Definitely not non-virtuous aspects of the mind, like anger. That is not part of our Buddha nature, because that's something we have to get rid of before our mind can become enlightened. But the virtuous aspects and neutral as well are part of Buddha nature. Okay, next question is, can we have two different conceptual thoughts or emotions at the same time? I think there's quotations in the sutras that say it's only possible to have one mental consciousness at the same time, at a time. Only one mental consciousness can be there at the same time. But, the mind can change very quickly. So only one at a time. But as far as different emotions, it's possible to have, because emotions are mental factors. Yeah, it is possible. I was just reading about this in here. Mentioned some of the afflictive mental factors. Some of them can be both present at the same time, but not always. Like you can't have attachment and anger at the same time, because those are opposite. And you can't obviously have love and anger at the same time. But some of the mental factors are compatible. They can both exist at the same time. Next, can a Buddha perceive only one object in their main mind? No, Buddha's mind is not like our mind. So it said that a Buddha's mind, every single moment of a Buddha's mind is omniscient, which means they see everything, absolutely everything without exception in each moment of their mind. So that's like mind-blowing. That's inconceivable for us. But yeah, a Buddha's mind, it's still impermanent, changing moment by moment by moment, but every single moment of a Buddha's mind is omniscient and sees everything. So that's how they were able to help all sentient beings. Okay, another question, does the clear and knowing also exist as one moment of mind to the next? I don't really understand what that means, but clear and knowing is the nature of the mind. Those are like the qualities, the characteristics of every single moment of mind. So every single moment of mind, and main minds, mental factors, and so on, they all have clear and knowing as their characteristics, their qualities. Every single moment of mind is clear, meaning it's non-physical, and it knows, it experiences. So that's simply the nature of mind. And when I was thinking about this, I just read this article in the New York Times. I saw this link about sentient robots that Disneyland is developing sentient robots. So I thought, what? So yeah, they're developing these robots that are like little figures that kind of can walk around Disneyland and say hi to people and sing songs and so on. But sentient robots. So it really made me wonder. And this is something to think about. Maybe you can discuss also in the afternoon. I mean, does a computer know? Does a computer or a robot or a sensor know? This quality of knowing, which we attribute to the mind, knowing. Is that something a computer does or a robot? I mean, when I'm typing and I misspell a word, my computer knows that and tells me, underlines it with red. But is that knowing as in mind knowing? Well, we don't really have time to get in. We could get into a lot of discussion about this, but that's something to think about and something to maybe discuss. This quality of knowing, which is the main quality of mind or consciousness, knowing an object, is that something that is also present in a computer or artificial intelligence? Because I remember years ago reading an article, it was actually in a Buddhist magazine, and it was about some people who are trying to develop artificial intelligence that is enlightened. They actually have this idea. They think it's possible to develop, an artificial mind that is an enlightened mind. And they're working on it, working very hard to develop that. What? Anyway, that's something to consider. But one thought I did have was, even if we agree that a computer or a sensor or a robot does know things, they are not clear. They don't have that attribute. Clear meaning non-physical, non-material. Because mind is both. It's clear, meaning it's non-material, non-physical, and it knows. So even if we agree that artificial intelligence does know things, but it doesn't have that attribute of being clear. So that's one thought I had, but you can think about it and discuss it yourself. Okay, let's stop there.